Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. I'm getting ready to play a mid-tempo track for you and talk about the production process through this. Not so much with the sounds, but with the composition and with the approach and how I found success with this. If that seems interesting to you, then stick around. I'm going to play this video and I would love it if you like the video and subscribe, and then we'll dive in. This is what the tune sounds like.
Recording to
Cool. So let's dive in. I want to start with the structure first because I feel like that is the most important part. It's not the first thing that I did, but just giving you some kind of insight as to like how I set this up. So the track starts here, I believe, and I take a couple of bars to kind of just have some kind of sound intro or whatever. Now, I do usually work off of 4 and 8 bar increments, but at the very beginning of a track, you can always like just have some kind of weird ambience or whatever that kind of comes into play. So there's this, then we introduce the melody, and then we start utilizing this as a build to where I'm trying to add more instruments over time and create tension. You'll hear that I've got a high pass filter that is building over time on the master, which is right here. So if we kind of skedaddle over here, you'll see that it'll turn on at some point, maybe. There we go. And then I'm automating this to high pass and also mono the signal before we get into the main section. So when you're doing builds, it's very easy to take some kind of sound, doesn't matter what it is. I've stretched out sounds a lot, like just been random and then pitched it up over time and then faded it in to where it's like woo. So risers should be relatively easy for you. But in the mix of that, while you're doing that, automating a high pass filter is a really good way to start to make everything quiet, and then obviously the volume and the energy of the main section hits so much harder. At least I think that it does. So next we have main section A, which is this purple guy here. That's the kind of 9 Inch Nails sounding bass, I guess. And then we have main section 1A to where I add harmonization to it with this and then also like a white noise thing to like make it seem like we're emphasizing that groove. This is the moment of pressure whenever the beat is playing. Right? And then after that, we have a release that happens within a build. And so we change the instrument, same melody, but we go into something that's more squarified now. And as you can hear, I've taken the bass out and changed to another bass over here while this is playing. So this is playing something completely independent. So that way, like, the melody is still relative, but I give you a little bit of variation through that. And then we have a build to where we have a bass that's pitching up, and then we give that melody like a full kind of like unleash or like an unlock of both the lows and the highs playing together. So now I want to talk about this for a second, because if you notice, like, the melody hasn't changed at all. This is pretty much a one riff track for the most part. The thing about it though is that in order to make this section different from this one, the only thing that I did was I took the same patch and then just made a few changes to what it was that I was doing, and obviously made this from a saw wave into a square. So creating variation doesn't need to be like a totally different like polarizing switch. It's something that is still relevant. The other thing that I did too was I switched up the beat from going from a to a break beat that's kind of like this. But really what I'm trying to do when it comes into these sections here is I am trying to express an idea. Then I'm trying to say, hey, how can I express this idea to where it's familiar but a little bit different? So I just made a couple of like key changes, not like note changes, but key changes that kept the same vibe but expressed it differently, because this section could have been replaceable with this one, right? And then even on this, like, I established a new groove, and then going back into the final part, I'm actually just trying to emphasize that again, to where I add a new melody. So as a means of composition, I'm utilizing harmony as a tool to enhance the groover, to help increase the vibe, I guess would be the way to say that. And then also I change up the percussion. So through here, I have this new percussion that comes in. So that's actually a vocal chop that I did, but there's more inside of this that will reveal all of the secrets. So as you can see here, we've got, you know, different percussion patterns, and then it changes here from being really nice and tight to an emphasis on and studying drumming or studying like composition for like typical even rock stuff or whatever, and listening to how people like keep the groove, especially when the melody doesn't change, is really cool, because you see how like a tune kind of can become progressive. And when people think of progressive, it's a really big trap, especially in like house music and stuff, because it'll be like boo, boo, kick, 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 kick hat, hit hat, da 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 da, like, and that's okay, but that's like a very rudimentary aspect of doing that. If you can make multiple sounds work and you've already got a groove established, but then you find ways to switch the entire groove up but still keep it familiar. So don't just add one sound, like you add and take away a couple, you know, like there's no rules, but sometimes by having that, or by, you know, kind of switching it up in that way, even if it's subtly, is extremely helpful. So really though, like, it's all stemmed off of this melody, and this is actually, sorry, it's this melody of where I actually started the track. This was the first thing that I put into this DAW, which was this guy. Somebody was asking me about Silent 1, the initial preset, and I didn't want to recreate the same melody, so I just made that or whatever, and I opened this up and started doing some sound design and kind of got in a similar realm or whatever. But then I was like, you know what, this is really cool. And so what I did was I took a copy of this, made a heavier version of it with this guy, and I've got this cool little trick where I'm doing this bandpass thing, and that's what makes it sound like it's that one song, Closer, from 9 Inch Nails. It sounds like it's something I made, so I didn't do that on purpose. It was just, I was just making shit. But But once I had that, I was like, okay, I know that I've got a banger, because to me this sound was so interesting that it could stand on its own. So when I started writing this section, the most important thing that I was trying to get with this was the relationship with the bass and the kick. Part of that is from sidechaining. Part of that is making sure that I found a kick that is suitable. I think that I just ended up making my own kick. Yeah, so this is just, yeah, I've made this in Phase Plant. I have masterclasses on my ARCANUM memberships and also on my website about how I make drums in Phase Plant, but it basically sounds like this. Sorry. I don't know. I just prefer doofy ass kicks. That's just what I like. And then the next thing was the snare. And the reason why is because if your snare sucks, like, you can actually get away with it as long as you've got a really good kick, because that's the driving force that you feel whenever a beat like this is playing, right? Usually you're not listening for the snare. The snare is the accent. The snare is something that, like, you hear. If I could take a page out of Hudson Lee's book, you feel the kick usually. You hear the snare. We're not really talking about mixing on this because I don't think that my mixes are great, but I do like this song, so whatever. And then I went for the snare and took just a regular, I actually just opened up my sample pack and found snare 5, and then I found one of my claps and just layered it. And I like to utilize, especially with, you know, cyberpunk kind of music, what's called a gated snare. And what that is you have a really big reverb that has a really loud tail, but as opposed to it fizzling out, it cuts it as soon as it hits under a certain loudness threshold. Like, once it passes, you know, say, because I don't really know how actually loud this is, you know, but once it hits past, you know, below 50 dB or whatever, it's going to completely silence the sound, and that way it keeps the drums relatively clean. You see how the kick is always clean and the snare always ends just before the next kick comes in. And so now there's a pretty decent relationship. I'm not even quite happy with the snare, but honestly it works. But now that you have that, that's pretty much all that's playing. It's a kick, a couple of snare layers, and then this little rhythmic thing that's just a piece of noise, I believe. Which, is that even playing? Yeah, so, like, that's it. Then, you know, I add in a cool little vocal, I add in some hi-hats, and I get going along with the groove. But really, this is the hard part, right? Is getting this right. And that's really what I wanted to talk about with the theme of this, and talk about how this works well together, because I only have a couple of elements. And so by having a really, you know, diverse or really varied melody, I guess, because it's not even the notes, but there's a rhythm that's happening, and there is this frequency thing that's happening with this bandpass that gives it a ton of motion. And so this is doing most of the legwork. The drums below it are kind of just like the driving force behind moving it forward and getting you, like, kind of used to, or training your ears to listen to this more than once. Because even if I just have this one bar is exactly the same as this one, and a little bit different than this one, because I actually pull this one off, but not to the point that, you know, it's like crazy. We'll talk about the bass line, or we'll talk about the fills in a second, but listen. I don't have to change anything because I got one bar out of the whole song right. And that's why it's so important to establish a riff. That's why it's so important to establish, like, a groove, or, like, just get one bar right and you've got a tune. You can literally just fade it in and then, you know, have something like that. But the song was not done, but, like, I didn't have to make a lot of other, like, super creative decisions to where, like, I had to really feel this out, because this took the energy of the track to where if it's listenable at the first go, you can probably repeat it, you know, quite a few times. So in order to not bore you, one thing that I did within this is start to add in little fills at the end of every 4 bars. So, you know, I've got, you know, a neuro bass or whatever. So within that, like, I don't do it necessarily every time. There are certain cases to where you'll see that, actually I do something a little bit different every time, but because this is so consistent, I feel like I can get away with it. So if you look here, this feels a little bit different. But I'm also using that as a transition and using other sounds to kind of fill the void to connect it to the next part. And using, we call them transitional sounds, but really think of it as like connection sounds, because utilizing stuff like this will help you bridge one piece of a track to another. Because this is like not finished, and by the time it hits that phrase, it's almost like duh, you're wanting to hear that, and then when it goes duh, it's an excellent opportunity for you to do something different right here, which is me anteing up the energy, or trying to anyways, and utilizing this to have more this is the most energetic part of the tune, in my opinion, to where it's like it's very intense. And so because of that, we can harmonize with the bass. I didn't change the bass, I just harmonized with it, and then I added this white noise motion to, and this happens a lot. You can just use white noise and like sweep it up, right? You hear that in dance music all the time, but I wanted it to be intense and to be something that was like unsettling, but not in an I'm uncomfortable way, but more so in a like, hey, this is a really big point of the song that is creating the most that's demanding the most attention, perhaps, or this should be the hardest I believe that people should dance. And it's the exposition of the story. Sorry, I wish that I could have said that elegantly the first time, but you guys know I don't edit my videos. So yeah, so we have different fills that come in. Then when we get to this part, right, we have another transitional sound, I believe, just using the same one actually. And then that's where we get into switching it up a little bit, because I'm giving the dancers, or giving even the listener, a break, because if it's just heavy all throughout the track, it's very difficult to hold someone's attention and to like keep them interested, but also it's just intense. Like you kind of have to respect people's emotions, attention spans, ability to focus on something with music, and that's part of the fun. And I'm not like saying this as a means of like you have to treat people like they're dumb or whatever, because honestly you got to make the music that you want to make. But just as a typical production of like, hey, this works, is we've got, this says 8 bars, but we've got 16 bars of really heavy dancing, and then we give the listener a break with a little bit of like lower volume, right? So when it comes to this, it's like the kick is still driving, right? But I'm not having to like listen so hard to the hardest stuff. I brought the energy down. But even within this time, right, as we're going, you can start to hear that I'm adding stuff to it now. I'm progressing the melodic aspect of it, in which to help continue push the story forward. And then and then I'm utilizing other sounds to help bring it back up to a build, and then switch up the dance, which is this part. But you'll notice that like there's other sounds within this that I start to reuse, because for one, it builds familiarity, and two, if it's nothing but variation, then it tends to be kind of like I feel like there's this balance of like surprising somebody with something that you've never heard of versus like just straight up variation. So when you have a really strong theme, and that's why I think that I was able to kind of push through with this, was that this melody and this kind of like really aggressive, plucky mid-bass thing worked really well for me in my favor, was that like all of these guys are just amalgamations of the first thing. And that's such a like helpful tool whenever you're trying to figure out how to diversify your sounds, is like just keep the same patch and then make a slight variation to it. Change the waveform, change the filtering position, change the space, the reverb, and suddenly you're starting to create like a more you're starting to create more sound variety, but it's still relative towards like your theme. And I would say that if you were starting a tune like this from scratch, start with a bass line. Start with something that is the main theme of the tune that you want people to listen to over and over again. And most people start with drums. I usually start with a groove. But with this particular music, even without a kick and snare, I'm usually listening for the synth. So if you can create a really cool synth line, you can add a kick snare pattern to it. And if you can add a kick snare pattern to it, then you can find some kind of reverse sample or reverb to get into that, to that loop, we'll say. And then once that loop starts to, stay the appropriate time, then figure out a way to kind of switch the loop up a little bit. And then after that, you've got a slight variation, create your outro, and then you're done. You don't even have to have multiple drops. But this is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes into like the approaches that I'm doing. And I'm not saying that what I'm doing is the right way or the only way, but I'm saying like, hey, I'm happy with like the music that I'm making, and I'm happy with getting into, I'm having more success with writing music because I just focus on, creating a groove, let the groove play, switch it up a little bit, get away into the groove, get away out. And if I wanted the track to go somewhere else, then instead of getting out, I just bring the energy down, or I find a way to reset, right? I give the listener a break. I give myself a break because I listen to this shit for hours. So, once you have something like that, you give it a break, start to build it back up, and then you just copy pasta the same thing if you want to. You could go in a completely different direction if that's what you're wanting to do, but taking an element that's familiar from the first part of the intro, and then repurposing it is generally a way to maintain a sense of cohesion whenever you talk about having a second main section or a second drop, or however you want to describe it. But then once you, pretty much do the same workflow that you do with the first section, when you have your second section, you can kind of have a build or whatever, and then you just kind of fade it out. Or for me, this is a little bit more narrative because this is called Aaron's Revenge. So this is about Samus. You hear a lot of the Metroid Prime samples in here and stuff, and I wanted it to be about her, like, I don't know, coming back and kicking Ridley's ass or something. But still, that contributes to the theme, right? It contributes. Also, vocals sometimes really help with the theme, and I don't mean like a, ooh, nothing like that, but something that's like a phrase or something that jumps out to you. Like recording to logbook is something that's in the background, but the more that you hear it, the more that it feels like you're in space, at least to me. And that's why I love this sample so much. Whenever people subscribe to the channel, that's the sound that it has, because it's like a spaceship, futuristic thing, and that fits the world of which I'm trying to build. So yeah, now everything I just said, I do think it is important, but let's just like, if I've already lost you with the lecture aspect of it, forget everything I just said for now, or put it in your pocket. Establish a groove and have the intention for mid-tempo music of writing a cool synth line. Find a way to elaborate on that synth line. Utilize the instrumentation or resample the sounds that you have either within your drums or your bass or your synths or something, and create ambience with it and create tension. And you can use filtered drums or something rhythmic to introduce the expectation of what listeners are going to hear. Then you connect it as your intro. Then to progress the song, you just want to elaborate on the groove, or evolve something, either one or several elements that's within the main section that you have. So when I say evolve, I mean just change it, do something different, just a little bit different. And then when you have that, you can either go into your break. That break can also serve as an outro. That outro can also serve as a bridge. It can serve as something that is going to be utilized as a section of connection. That rhymed unintentionally, but that's really cool. A section of connection that is going to either complete or conclude your piece, or help move it to what comes next. And then from there, like, main sections are main sections, right? Or if you want to go into something like change the energy, whatever, or do something completely different, it's how you link multiple ideas to the same project. But it's cool. The more that you practice intros and the more that you practice outros, the more that you are practicing transitions. And that's like a really cool tip. So don't disregard your intros, even if they're short. But yeah, so once you have that, then, all I did was I had like some cool sounds that sounded like a suit, it was like scanning, because we kicked Ridley's ass. And then I have this other version that, as I said before, can either be a bridge or an outro. In this case, I don't want to do any more to this project because I don't feel like putting any more work into it. But if you listen to this, this sounds like it can go somewhere else, right? So if I wanted to build the energy again, what are some ideas that I could have utilized? I could add a kick. I could, add percussion to it, start to add more music and variety. You can hear that this is high pass. So maybe over time, it's like, we're starting to bring back the full frequency range. But the reason why I wanted this to be an outro, as cool as I think this idea is that we've already got two really solid beats. I don't want to either A, take the beat from this or take the beat from this, and B, I don't want to take or make a whole completely different beat. I feel like the energy that we have told the story already. So even though I really like this sound, and even though like we could continue that, I just didn't find it to be necessary, long story short. So in any case, you know, all the phrasing and whatnot that I have is really just, hey, we've got this really cool melody, and then to give it some variation at the end of this, I wanted to do something a little bit different each time. So, you know, we've got this sound, then we have this one. It's just a pitch drop. And then as a really big fill to change the energy, we've got this, this sound. And the reason why I did that was because it was like, oh, something's coming, and stop. Sound design highlight, let's go. And that was just the vibe that I wanted to create with that. So if you look at this, I do have like 2 sounds that are layered, but that's really it. Yeah, it's just 2 sounds. So it's the red sounds, and then it's this thing. But the cool thing about it is that this is able to stand out on its own, right? This is a sound design highlight for me. So I'm moving everything else out of the way and being like, look at how cool my sound design is. Yay. Right? And then we move on. And something that's really helpful whenever you're just talking about groove and you're talking about vibe is that you want to play. You want to play with that groove. You know, I talked with the last video that I made about the idea of how it's very difficult to write sometimes with a kick and snare, like kick, snare, because you have to literally come up. It's almost like starting from nothing because you're essentially writing to a tempo. You know, even if you have like a break, sometimes like a or boo, book, boo, book. Sometimes it's very difficult to link the percussion to a musical context. So if the more accents that you have, even if it's just a hi-hat, the more rhythm and placement that you're starting to create, especially when it comes to beat writing, the easier that it's going to be to help fuel something based off of the beat that you have. But whatever you start with, whether it be a melody, a drum group, or like a drum break, or, you know, drum pattern, or a bass line, or a chord progression, generally speaking, that is what you start to build other elements off of. Now, it's not to say that you might start there and then you hear this completely new idea and you start building the track around that, but generally the inception of what the track is going to become is based off of the first thing that you start working towards, because you put a sound in the DAW, everybody does it, and they say, okay, how do I create something that goes along with this? But you see what I'm saying? Like, you make the first thing that you put in here oftentimes the nucleus, and then everything else kind of spreads out and comes around that. This is evident because this melody that I made the entire track about the melody. In terms of like bass writing and stuff, is like, if you write a bass line that's really cool, you're probably going to try to find some drums to go with it. You most likely won't just be like random drum group, random bass line, and then go together. If you write a drum groove that has really groovy movement or whatever, then you're going to try to find stuff that's going to complement that. But that's still the core of what it is that you're doing. And so my advice to you, whenever you're writing any genre, to be honest, because now I'm just spouting thoughts, is to be aware of how you start. There is no right or wrong. It can change. But when it comes into what it is that you're doing, figure out what you put something in and, you know, enjoy that. And once you enjoy that to the point that you want to start adding stuff to it, then that will help kind of fuel how you go from one idea to the next, right? Dude, freaking Zane Wolf and Cage and Chi respectively, literally the thing that I took away from all the lessons that I've learned from them is just, it's always about the groove. Always about the groove. The groove can be on time, it can be swung, it can be, you know, super sloppy or whatever, but when it comes to beat writing, that's what a beat is to me. Because like, you know, it's cool, but it's all about the accents, it's about the groove, it's about creating a push and a pull with creating that movement between somebody, you know. there's a lot of different ways to explain that, and I can talk about groove and whatnot, which is another video that I wanted to do about learning how to actually listen to music. We'll do that in a different video, as I said before. But yeah, so within this track, I think that there's at least some places to start if you want to do that. If you want me to go into the sound design or something, I might do that in another video, or maybe I'll put it up for the masterclass, so that way I'm having some, you know, exclusive content or whatever. But yeah, other than that, that's kind of my breakdown of this track and the approach to how I make things work. And hopefully I left you with some insight to help you go into your next studio session with a little more confidence and a little more of like, I kind of feel like I know what I'm doing now. Because that's the purpose of this video. Not that I know what I'm doing, but hey, here's documented information. So anyways, thanks for your time, everybody. I really appreciate it. Check out alchemy.com for my presets. You can get a new awesome shirt on the shelf that I have on my YouTube videos. If you open up the description, you'll see them. You can also book a lesson with me, or just liking the video and maybe leaving a nice comment helps a lot too. Thanks everybody, I appreciate it. Have an awesome rest of your evening. Bye.